Connie. I'm so
Hello,
excited to have you
hello.
here. We're into the next episode of Pay to Be You podcast, and today I've got Connie here from Haze, and she's going to be going through things related to burnout. And I know from my story, my experience of burnout, there's a lot that's happening, and I know this is very real for my community. So I thought I'd get Connie on today and go through, what's going on when we feel burnt out, how to overcome it, and how to move through it as well. So Connie, I'm gonna hand it over to you, just to tell us a little bit more about your story. I know it's incredible what you've overcome and moved through. And yes, like what tools do you use? And what have you gone through? Let us
Yeah,
know.
amazing. Thank you. I mean, first of all, thank you so much for having me on. I absolutely love Vanessa, so I'm so excited to be here. So thank you for having me. But yeah, my journey, how can I compress this? It's such a long journey. I think it was around 12 months that beyond a lifetime of going through chronic stress. But basically, what I would say is from a very young age, I was always a workaholic. And I think so many of us can relate to that, right? So many of us are workaholics. Even to this point, I find it difficult sometimes to not slip back into that. But I was working in the luxury fashion industry, which, as many people know, if you've seen Devil Wears Prada, it can be very, very cutthroat industry.
Yeah.
I was working in the fashion industry, doing crazy long hours, working myself to the bone in lots of senior positions, very high pressured roles. And there was basically a point, I was actually also a personal trainer and holistic health coach on the side.
Oh,
So I
that's
was
the other day.
I know at some point I was getting up at 4 a.m., training my clients back to back, going to my full-time role, being on WhatsApps 24/7 with clients, hitting the pillow at about 11 o'clock at night, and then doing it all over again. And when I look back now, I'm like, oh my gosh, how did my body not shut down sooner? But yeah. But in a nutshell, what happened was I got 4 viruses back to back, very, in the space of 4 months,
I
very,
actually
very,
heard
very,
that
very
part of the
sick.
story.
Yeah, that was kind of what triggered everything.
Okay.
And my body was in so much chronic stress from burnout again and again and again that I just couldn't recover. So I basically started getting all these crazy symptoms, neurological symptoms. I couldn't get out of bed anymore. I was bedbound for months. I had to move back to my parents at one point because I couldn't work anymore. I lost my entire life, my entire identity, bedbound for months, housebound for about 6 months
Oh, wow.
before I started learning about neuroplasticity and the power of rewiring the brain. So it's something I already knew a lot about, but I delved into much deeper because I knew that there was something wrong with my brain, because I would do simple things like try and go for a 2-minute walk and I'd get these crazy migraines, blurry vision, all of these weird symptoms that I can't even, there was over 50 symptoms. And when I started to practice neuroplasticity, which I think we're going to touch upon today,
Yeah.
I just noticed my entire world change. I basically rewired the neural pathways in my brain to believe that I was a healthy person, to believe that I was a calm and balanced person. And as I practiced that again and again through some of the techniques I'll talk about later, I began to heal. And I was told this was a chronic illness that I would never heal by the doctor. And I'm now literally in a completely different life with a new business, teaching others how to do the same. And, I don't even get stressed anymore to the same extent by any means. I'm just flowing with life. And it's basically like a total rebirth. That's the way I describe it to the people that ask me. So yeah, but I know you went through your own burnout story as well, didn't you? Like you suffered the
Yeah.
same.
Yeah. And I'll touch on that just if anybody isn't familiar with my story, and I suppose why I'm so passionate about this conversation, these conversations happening more often. So yes, I burned out about 4 years ago. Also, I had severe high functioning anxiety. And this is, I think, one of the biggest things is we can function. And often you can see the success, the people that are out there crushing their goals and getting the things. Often it is from the state of severe high functioning anxiety or a trauma response to success, that we have to do it because we don't want to be poor, or we don't want to be broke, or I come from a family of 4 kids, very little money. My father had mental health issues growing up, so things were incredibly unpredictable at home. And of course, the way that I learned to cope was just overworking, achieving to any extent. And yeah, 2018, I just had a 6-figure week. So on paper, it looked amazing. And there I was, completely crashed. So, and I burnt out. And it was just after kind of a huge space of expansion. My nervous system went into shutdown, and learning to, as you say, rewire your brain, learning embodiment practices so that we can, and regulation practices. It changes your entire world. So I suppose for those listening, it doesn't matter which phase you are in, if you're, stuck deeply in burnout, or you're a year into a journey, or 4 years into a journey. Life can shift. We can create radiance. And I think that's what I was just looking at you, and I was like, there's so much radiance, there's so much vitality. And there's no ways that you would think, like 12 months ago you were bedbound, unable, 4 viruses, all the symptoms of burnout, foggy brain, all of that. So that is huge. And of course, often we go through these big things in life, these ruptures in our lives that create our movement, create our message, create what we're really fucking here for. But of course,
100%.
Not great when you're in the thick of it, but
no.
we can move through it. We can move through it. So I know, and this is something that I love to work with clients, because I don't really work with clients that are burnt out. So I think that's also why it's like, I need somebody that really is able to work with those clients they're burnt out. And I know when we're in that space, we're not in bigger vision work.
Exactly.
No, because you're just in that survival mode. So for those listening that maybe can't access that bigger vision, or what they're here for, their life purpose, or opening their channels, knowing that you can. And often it is, isn't it? It's almost that like portal that we go through from more of a spiritual perspective. Of course, we go through these places of severe burnout and anxiety and all of these symptoms, so that we can shift and do our work. So tell me a little bit more about your vision and the clinics and all of that.
So I think in a nutshell, my vision is to empower women to understand that they can create any reality that they want if they learn how to rewire their brain, if they learn how to come down into the body and feel safe in their body. They literally have limitless power over their lives.
We're unstoppable.
Exactly. We are unstoppable. I mean, I'm living proof of that. I was told I wouldn't recover fully, and here I am now launching my own business. You're exactly the same. You're exactly the same. You're living proof of that. And it's really just, for me, regardless of your past, regardless of how long you've been suffering with burnout, regardless of the childhood that you had, the adversities that you've gone through, it's my mission to help women to see that there is another way. There is another way to live the life of your dreams. That doesn't mean that you have to constantly be burning yourself out, hustling, driving yourself into the ground, and also missing out of the joy of life. I could tell you honestly, the past 10 years of my life, I don't really remember more than 4 times being fully present. And that's the genuine truth. Now I'm present every day, and
Yeah.
I work from that place of presence.
Yeah.
And part of me thinks, oh God, I've wasted so much time. But honestly, it's like you said earlier, we really have to go through that pain, and that we really have to hit rock bottom sometimes to have such a big life change. A rebirth comes from, being down in the ashes, doesn't it? So
Yeah.
it really can be your biggest opportunity for growth. Burnout in general, I think, can be a blessing or a curse. You kind of decide what it's going to mean for you. And I'm just, keen to help women realize that, and guide them through that process. So I have an online burnout clinic, which is launching next week, which I'm very excited about. And I also have Haze is actually a wellness store, first and foremost, which creates products to help you reconnect to the self. So that was always running in the background. It took a hiatus, but now it's kind of coming together to be this holistic clinic / store to help women reconnect to themselves, really, and rewire their brains. So I'm very excited, very excited.
Yeah. And then the clinics that you're going to be opening soon in
Yeah.
LA, New York, London, books
Yes,
coming soon,
that's the plan.
and
Absolutely.
speaking
Yeah.
on stage, and retreats as well.
Yes,
Um,
exactly.
so all of it is done, and this is
Yes.
one of the biggest things, isn't it? That we talk a lot about manifestation. And I know wasn't something we discussed in terms of what we were going to talk about.
I love it. That's my
Yeah,
I love
let's
it.
go through this. It's one of the biggest things about manifesting. And as I said just now, is like we can't actually access that bigger vision or open up our channels or create something bigger when we're stuck essentially in survival mode, and out of the body, at the mercy of our thoughts, and really just living, yes, either stuck in the past or stuck in the future, never actually in the present, which is where all our magic happens, and it's where all manifestation happens. And we can't be needy and creepy around it, and until we learn how to actually come into the present moment, and you obviously use neuroscience, embodiment, neuroplasticity, to rewire the brain to come back into the present, to create that bigger vision. Anything you want to add on to that? Because I mean, that's the biggest, that's so many people are like, I want to get these things, I want to get these things, I want to manifest this thing, but their nervous system and their minds and their bodies are just not on board with that.
100%. I can fully relate to everything that you're saying, because I was that person. And if one of the most powerful things that I think we can do as someone that's suffering from burnout is start to identify who we are identifying with. And that's a bit of a complex way of saying it, but what I mean is, if we are always calling ourselves an anxious person, if we are always saying to ourselves that we are constantly dealing with burnout, we're constantly stressed, we are effectively reinforcing that neural pathway in the brain. And then your nervous system is looking at life through the lens of an anxious person, looking through the lens of the life of someone that is stressed. When you're in that fight, flight, freeze, stress response, you can't make decisions like these big decisions that you're talking about of where you want your life to go. You're living in a constant state of chronic stress. All those resources that you have, all that energy that you have, is being funneled into that stress response. You don't have the energy, the mental capacity to think bigger, look at the bigger picture and think, what do I actually want from life? Am I actually aligned with the things that I want from life? And it's very difficult for us to do that in that chronic state of stress. So I think the first thing I would say to someone who is suffering from burnout or chronic stress is stop identifying as someone that is suffering from burnout and chronic stress. And it's not to be, it's not toxic positivity. It's really just about showing your brain that there is another option for you and what that could look like, and it's really just about repeating that again and again. So we believe that there's another way, and it could look like looking for evidence of other people that have, gone through burnout and now have the business of their dreams, like yourself, that you are walking evidence to other people's brains that it is possible to live a life of balance and be abundant. So that's where I would start.
And you, It's amazing. So yes, one of the things that you wrote actually in a post. So you said kind of if you're identifying as anxious, yes, that's how you're going to be seeing the world. You're going to be identifying and moving as that identity of the anxious version of you.
Mm.
And it's so interesting. You said that um when I was going through burnout, one of the things, you know, they're like, you have severe anxiety, you are an anxious person. And I remember saying,
Mm.
fuck that. Like, I'm not using this title.
Yes.
I'm not using this title. No, no, no. I'm not
Yes.
even going to that space. Um,
Mm.
and I think that's such a key thing. If you see yourself as burnout, you see yourself and you keep repeating that same thing.
Mm.
And it's not toxic positivity, as you mentioned as well, which I think is so important. It's not bypassing. It's knowing that all versions, all timelines of us exist in this very moment. And
Exactly.
the highest expression of ourself is available for us to embody right now. And I know you also love Dr. Joe Dispenza and
Oh
a
my
lot of
God, yeah.
his work. And speak to us a bit about that, because I think that was such a big thing for you, is not only, of course, the neuroplasticity and the positive reinforcement, the shifting of your neural pathways, but you were doing so much work of embodying the identity of who you wanted to
Yes.
be.
Absolutely. Yeah. Embodiment for me was the missing piece of the puzzle. Neuroplasticity is a really great way to start rewiring the brain and getting yourself into a more positive headspace. When you get yourself into a more positive headspace, your body can heal because, you know, you're no longer in that state of fight, flight, or freeze. But the problem with neuroplasticity is you can kind of reinforce these messages, but if you're not embodying this in the real world by any degree, apart from just telling yourself these things, there's really a limitation with what you can achieve. So when it comes to embodiment, it was really me sitting down every day. And this, there's a lot of people that talk about this work, Dr. Joe Dispenza being one of them. I always have his work on this, I'm like always referring back to him. I think he's an amazing human being. But really, actually, stepping into that person that you want to become before you're ready is really important. It's really important to rewire the brain, and an extension of the kind of basic neuroplasticity exercises that you do. And for me, that looks like sitting down every single day and visualizing myself as a healthy person and getting to the point where I felt it like it was almost true. I would literally get into this meditative state, and it's not really meditating, it is visualization, but really thinking in detail about what she would be doing, what she would be wearing, who was she friends with, and how did this not align with my life now once I'd come out of that visualization. I'm moving towards that by 1% each day. When I was sick, I obviously couldn't just jump up and go and start the business of my dreams. But what I could do is I could dress a little differently that day if I had the energy. I could put on something that made me feel like that woman, or I could research a studio space that I'd want to have in the future. And what we don't realize is a lot of people think that this is kind of like fluffy, it's just visualization, like there's no science behind that. But it's just not true. There's so much science behind visualizing that higher version of yourself. And when you take aligned action, which I know you're all about, I know that's a huge part of your work, then you're not only changing your future, but you're actually changing your physiology. You're changing the actual makeup of your brain, and your brain starts to think from that level of mind. That's one of Dr. Joe's quotes, thinking from that new level of mind. And it's true. So just by any percent possible, what can you do to move into that version before you're ready? Because it won't happen if you wait.
Exactly. Before you're ready is the biggest thing. And not using your current evidence as the evidence. The current evidence is only a match for what you're currently thinking, feeling, taking the aligned action, and being. So we need to live beyond our current evidence, the current reality, and as you say, find evidence of people that are doing the things that you want to do, or find resources of examples of, yeah, somebody that has shifted from burnout or whatever it may
Yeah.
be, is getting that evidence so that your brain starts to see more and more evidence of wellness, and that we can shift, and that we can create. And yeah, it's amazing. You were saying kind of burnout and going into the ashes to rise from it. Burnout still is one of my greatest, it's my greatest gift. It shifted my whole trajectory of my life, and woke me up, essentially made me
Yeah.
conscious to, what am I thinking? What am I feeling? Do I want this? Is this how I want to live
Mm.
my life? And then understanding, when we move through this, the ability that we have to consciously create our reality. And it's so, so much manifestation is around like, what do you want? What do you want?
Yeah.
And it's okay if you don't know when you're in a
Yeah.
space of burnout. And I think that puts so much pressure on, like, I need to know what I want. I need to
So
be in
true.
this
Yeah.
space. And if you can't access that, then that's when you need support of somebody like Connie, who can bring you back into regulation and being able to actually move from that space. So I think it's such an important process and conversation that
Yeah.
not much is actually spoken about in law of attraction and manifestation,
Yes.
although we
So
won't
true.
get started on that,
We could go
because
on for hours. That's like
that's a
that's a series. That's not a podcast, right? Oh, but you know what? You're so right. I think that evidence piece is so important. And there was two options when I was sick. It was I could either join the groups for people that had ME, this chronic illness, otherwise known as CFS. I could join the groups. They call them the spoonies. How many basically talking about all the difficulties that they're going through and supporting each other. Or I could choose the groups of people that had recovered and how they got there from
Yeah,
the incurable, in quotes, illness. So
exactly.
it really is about the environment as well. Like your brain is paying so much attention to the environment you're in. If you're in the same environment again and again and again every single day, you are hardwiring that environment into your reality. And as soon as we step out of that just a little bit, the possibilities open up, and it's, yeah, so important. So yeah, I love that.
Amazing. So let's talk about this is such a key thing. I'm
Mm,
just going to read it directly from what you wrote on Instagram. What a lot of people don't understand, that we become addicted to stress. The brain is an organ that seeks predictability, and if chaos is familiar, it will seek more of it to cultivate a false illusion of safety. Okay.
mm,
Speak a bit more about that. I think that
yeah.
is the brain seeks predictability, the familiar. How do you move out of it? How do we get out of that space? Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, yeah, it is. It's kind of mind-blowing when you think that the brain would seek stress, right? That's how I felt when I discovered this. But it kind of makes sense if you think about when we're younger and when we're growing up in those formative years. A lot of us that deal with burnout probably have had difficult childhoods, were brought up in chaos. And it's not necessarily that, those two are 100% linked, but it is quite common. That I see in my clients is, growing up in chaos, growing up in unpredictability. And just like many of us, tend to end up in relationships like our parents were in, if they were in a very dysfunctional relationship, a lot of us can find ourselves in the same relationships in our adulthood. It's the same with the environment that you find yourself in. If you are used to predictability, if the brain grew up with unpredictability, sorry, not predictability, with chaos, it's going to seek that chaos to basically get a false sense of control, a false sense of feeling like home almost. So there's that side of it. And naturally being a highly sensitive or anxious person, because that's how you survived when you were younger. You survived by being on high alert all the time because perhaps there was shouting going on, or perhaps you had to, perhaps you became a perfectionist because it was how you got attention in the home. There's so many reasons why we are the way that we are. but our brain just goes for what's quickest to give us that sense of satisfaction, even if it's not healthy for us. So there's that side of it, the kind of, how we grew up. But then there's also the side of, if we don't allow ourselves to come back to that baseline after we've become stressed. So when let's say we have a stressful situation at work, the healthy response would be to allow ourselves to decompress from that, let our nervous systems regulate before we kind of move on to the rest of our day. If we have this, if we seek that stress because that's what we're used to, our baseline becomes higher and higher. We have to keep meeting that baseline, and it changes and changes. And instead of actually allowing ourselves to downregulate, we actually seek more stress and more stress and more stress, because it's almost like an addiction. And one of the things I felt when I was working was I would get a little dopamine hit sometimes from these from these stressful moments, because when your body and brain overcome stress, we get a little dopamine hit, and that's good, that's rewarding, and that can effectively trigger that addiction as well. So there's lots of different ways that it can happen, but in a nutshell, the amygdala in the brain becomes more and more sensitive the more we keep triggering that stress response, triggering it and triggering it and triggering it, either because we're slightly addicted to it or because we don't let ourselves down regulate from that stress. Both kind of go hand in hand. So as it becomes more and more sensitive, it takes only a little bit to set it off, that email from your colleague, and then you are stuck in this state of fight, flight, or freeze, and stillness feels so uncomfortable to you. You're so far gone from stillness because your baseline has changed so much over the years that your level, your kind of baseline compared to someone that regulates in a healthy way is so much different. You are living in this state of chronic stress, and that has become your new normal. And that's when we don't even realize we have a problem before things like chronic illness pop up, which is what happened to me. I just thought I was a super driven, workaholic, yes, but I didn't think I had an issue with stillness. I just thought I preferred to be busy. But actually, when I was sick, when everything was taken away from me, I entered a complete identity crisis because I didn't know who I was in stillness. Exactly. And that's something we tend to avoid. We tend to avoid that feeling of, I don't know who I am without work.
Yes.
Because we didn't really properly develop a proper identity as a child because we were going through so much. So that's part of it too. Sorry, that's very long.
No, you've explained it, actually distilled quite a lot of information into something. So we seek out more of it, and I think this is one of the biggest things, is our nervous system and our brain is creating our reality. And I think when we start to understand that we can shift it, that we keep creating it, we almost have that, as you say, that dopamine hit. Oh yeah, I overcame that. Oh yeah, let's overcome something else. Come, let's do it. That we start to create more of it in our reality, or seek out more of it in our environment. So what would you say would be, if you would say like 3 top things to get out of this pattern, to be able to downregulate, to come back to baseline, what would you say would be kind of 3 key things that you would suggest?
Okay, so I think the first one would be becoming, I'm not going to say go do a 20-minute meditation, because you know what, saying that to someone with burnout is feels impossible. And it is impossible. When you're in that state of chronic stress, you can't downregulate. So I think the first thing I would say is to start becoming aware of when you're revving. When you're really noticing that actually you're full of adrenaline, and that might be most of the time. But that's the first thing, I think, is becoming aware. And you can even set yourself a timer throughout the day. At one point I had it going every 20 minutes because my adrenaline was that high. So I think the first thing is getting aware of how much adrenaline you're running on, and how much you're avoiding stillness. That's so important. That's the first thing. The second thing I would say is, when you start to notice that adrenaline rush and how much you're living in that, is to start to try and interrupt that pattern. And it's not going to work at first because, it's not that simple. The brain requires a lot of repetition, but it can be as simple as, and Annie Hopper actually created this technique, and it's just going stop, just stopping the, literally saying stop, and then, moving your attention to something completely different. So it might be, stop, I choose to feel calm, or stop, I choose to take my time with this. And you might not actually feel calm afterwards. You might not actually take your time with this, but we're just starting to, create new neural pathways in the brain that are healthier for the body. So yeah, and I think also realizing that it's okay to feel stressed, and not, berating yourself for that. So that's another one that's good, is stop. It's okay to feel stressed. It's safe. I'm safe. Telling yourself you're safe. I think that's important. And then for the third thing, I think it's really getting clear on what you want from life. I know that sounds like a really big thing, and that can feel overwhelming in itself, but if you practice the first two steps first for a good few weeks, you might find that you're in a place that you can better look into this. But I think it's really important that, recognizing that your burnout might not actually come from the fact that you're overworking. It might come from the fact that you're in a completely misaligned role that isn't your true purpose and passion. That creates so much chronic stress for us. So getting clear on what we want from life, and the easiest way I think to do this is to ask yourself, what would I do if money was no, if money was no, yeah, exactly. If I had all the money in the world, what would I do? That's the best way, I think, of realizing your true passions and purpose. And then it's kind of moving towards that by any, 1% a day if you can, and continuing to rewire the brain as you go. And embodiment's also another thing, but I think those three things are great to start, because embodiment can be very difficult when you're in that really high state of stress. So I would start with those three things.
Yeah, because you're kind of in the brain, out of the body, and it's almost just kind of getting out of that state of high arousal.
Yes, exactly.
To be able to be like, that pattern interrupt is such a big one. Stop.
Yeah.
I choose to feel. And really kind of every single time, without being like, oh, it didn't work, that kind of frustration which comes in. It's understanding that if you have been chronically in severe anxiety for, for me, it was 35 years, I was projecting onto everybody else. Everybody else was like weak for being anxious. There I was with kind of this anxiety, this high anxiety. So understanding that grace and that compassion, if it took 35 years to build that neural pathway, it doesn't have to take 35 years to shift it. It can happen as fast as we believe it does, depending on where our belief and where our awareness is, and obviously also without putting that pressure on ourselves. But I think those are such divine practices when we can just start coming into awareness, stop, and then what do you actually want from your life? Because as you say, when we're doing what we love, it doesn't, sometimes it is, burnout is a sign. And that's why when we judge it as good or bad, sometimes it's a sign to redirect. It's a sign to come back into your truth. It's a sign to be like, what is out of alignment? But let's not make it good or bad. Let's just get curious and observe it. And I think that's one of the biggest things is, we label it as bad. And then when we label it as bad, I always create chaos, or I'm always anxious, or whatever the case. And then the next moment, you're in that same state over and over and over and over again. Yeah, thank you so much, Connie.
Thank you.
Anything else that you want to add? And also just tell us where we can find you. About your current offer, how to book in a call with you, or sign up for your new offer. Yes,
Thank you so much for having me. First of all, that was amazing. And yeah, you can find me at Haze_Wellness, so HAZE_Wellness on Instagram. That's probably the easiest place to find me, as my site is launching next week. But if you follow the link in the bio, you can sign up to the newsletter and book in a free consultation call for a 3-month or 6-month burnout coaching program. So that kind of covers everything from rewiring. I've been trained in neuroplasticity as well. So yeah, I've got a really holistic approach. It's not just, focusing on brain rewiring. It's also embodiment. It's also understanding what you want from your life goals, and helping you get there. So yeah, it's a holistic program, and I hope someone can join me.
Yeah, I know you've already experienced and seen so many incredible shifts with clients. This stuff works. This
Yes.
work works. And I think often when people are going through burnout, they may go to therapy, which I went to initially. But it didn't really give me the tools to move forward from that set point. I kept repeating the same thing over and over again. And I think it's so beautiful that you've connected all of it, the brain, the body, and then of course that what do you actually want from your life, and that element of coaching and moving forward, and creating the life that you are destined for. If you know you're made for more, which most people that are going through burnout, they're going through this transition period to redirect your life to go into something so much bigger. So thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for all
Thank you,
the
Vanessa.
wisdom.
I love you so much. I'm just like,
tips alone, if somebody took them and followed them, they could really start to shift their experience. And then of course all the evidence and everything. So thank you so much.
thank you. Amazing. Thank you.